Episode 57, Chapter 54. Chapter 54.
Run,
Link said, eyes darting about.
run. Defenders to the walls. Everybody else, up to the top of the hill.
His words had an immediate effect. Music stopped. Conversation stopped. And then people began to move. It was chaos. People ran this way or that. Some ran for weapons. Others ran for safety. Others still ran to find family. Parents. Siblings. Children. Everything felt wrong. The air felt off. It felt thick. Oily. Malice. Why is there malice here? And then the screams started. His head jerked to the side, and he ran, his sword shining like a beacon. He shoved his way through a crowd of onlookers, to where a woman had fallen to the ground, and backed up quickly on her hands. In front of her was a bokoblin, but it was unlike any other that Link had seen. Its eyes shone from an internal red light. It lay on its belly. Its legs had been crushed to bones and one of them jutted out, red in the moon's light. Yet, though it was severely disabled, it crawled towards the woman, hands scrabbling at the cobblestone. Link sprang forward and sliced the master's sword down, through its neck. As he did so, blackish mist sprayed out of the wound, and the creature fell limp, its head rolling free, eyes no longer glowing.
Where did it come from?
He asked, breathing rapidly. His eyes darted around. The woman on the ground, he only just now recognized her as Meghin, pointed a shaking finger at a spot of disturbed rubble from one of the buildings that had suffered damage in the battle. He took a step towards it, but then more screams broke out elsewhere in the village. Cursing, he leaped over the still prone woman and pushed through the crowd. A little foe this time, with a gaping hole in its chest that leaked the black smoke. It bent low and then leaped onto a man, a villager, slamming its clawed feet into his chest and digging them in.
No!
Link cried, running forward and shouldering the little foe off the man. Its claws tore cloth and flesh as it was flung off, flailing. He reached it a moment later, slamming his sword down into it, giving it another wound to match the first. Black smoke sprayed free in much greater amounts than its pre-existing chest wound, and he watched as the light in its eyes went out. He looked at the man, who desperately felt at his chest. He was bleeding all over his tan tunic, but Link didn't think it looked that bad. He would survive. Link reached down, grabbing him by the arm, and hauling him to his feet.
Oh!
A trio of Gerudo rushed by, holding scimitars. Link followed them, running down the hill to where the broken wall stood. He reached it and peered out the now open gate. What he saw chilled him to his core. A sea of red eyes. Illuminated by the bright red moon overhead, he could see the piles of bodies writhing as more and more of the monsters, the dead monsters, pushed themselves back up to their feet and then began to walk, shamble, or crawl towards Hateno village.
Archers! We need archers!
He looked to those that had already gathered at the gate.
Start a new barricade. We need to block that gate. Don't let them in the city. Where are you? I need to check to the north. We didn't clear it of the bodies yet.
Link ran, boots pounding through puddles that had turned red like blood. On the way, he found another bokoblin, this one with a skull half caved in. It had appeared out of another of the destroyed buildings. They must have missed checking some of these for bodies. Without slowing, he decapitated it and kept moving. People were running in earnest now. He heard more screams but also commands from the military commanders. They were trying to organize the new defense, but they would be too slow. Too many had gorged on food and already went to bed. Many might even be drunk. Oh, goddess, please. He roughly pushed through a crowd of confused-looking Gorons.
To the wall. Help them repel the monsters.
He kept running, not checking to see if they'd listen to him. As he ran, he began to hear the clanging of metal on metal and cries of pain. The fighting had already begun to the north. He rounded a corner and there, before him, lay the plateau that he had led the charge upon earlier that day. Red-eyed monsters had risen all around, and many of them still had their weapons and the apparent wherewithal to use them. As he watched, a Zoro was run through by a moblin wielding a spear. Link felt as though he could feel the wound himself.
No.
He ran forward, slicing off the moblin's arm and then left a deep cut through its chest. It died as quickly as the others, but it was already too late for the Zora. Cursing himself for moving too slowly, Link whirled, looking for other fighters. A Gerudo desperately fought against a one-armed brute of a bokoblin. She ran it through the chest, and Link breathed a sigh of relief, until he realized that it didn't die. Instead, it swung a club, taking her in the side of the head and dropping her, all while having been impaled by the scimitar. Link dispatched it by removing its head and knelt by the Gerudo, feeling for a pulse. She lived. That was all he could do now. He rose again and surveyed the battlefield. Others fought here. Goron slammed hammers into the creatures, but it didn't stop them, even as it shattered bones and bodies. Even broken, they kept moving. Others, like the Gerudo, hacked off limbs, which proved just as ineffective at actually killing the creatures. Each wound produced the black smoke, but to a much smaller degree than his own sword did. It's the sword. They, like other creatures born of malice, are weak to the master's sword. It was a horrifying thought. There was an army of upwards of 1,500 creatures rushing towards Hateno village, and the only way he knew to kill them was by using the master's sword. It would be a massacre.
Zelda, what do I do?
He said, as he charged forward and finished off another of the creatures.
Their heads.
She said in his mind.
Ganon's malice is concentrated there. Perhaps, if you remove it.
It was an idea. He looked towards one of the Gerudo still fighting with the now armless Lizalfo.
Remove its head.
The Gerudo didn't need to be told twice and swept her blade through the creature's extended neck. It collapsed, and Link saw its eyes go out. Black smoke sprayed from its wound.
Spread the word,
he called as he ran past.
Remove their heads, if you can. It's their weakness.
A Lizalfo leaped down onto top of him, its tongue lolling out and rubbing against his cheek as he fell to the ground. It was dry and shriveled. Cursing, Link rolled to the side, throwing off its balance as it attempted to thrust a blade down into his back, and he swept the master sword up, removing its hand. Black smoke sprayed from it, and the creature released a scream, collapsing to the ground and twitching. Its eyes went out. Even being cut by the master's sword in a non-lethal place can kill them.
Zelda, I need your help. I need you to tell me where people are in trouble. I can't be everywhere at once, but I'll do what I can, Link. Ganon is fighting me. He knows that I would provide you aid.
He nodded and sprinted forward. Suddenly, he saw a very large red eye in the distance. He grimaced. The Hinox had risen. Time to test out my theory. He ran forward, rolling under a massive fist as the giant tried to crush him, and swept out at its exposed belly with the sword. It cut deep and black smoke sprayed against him. He flinched, but the concentrated malice didn't hurt him, instead appearing to flee, as it had when fighting the creature in Naboris. The Hinox bellowed and swept its arm out, catching Link in the back. He was flung forward, and the master's sword left his hand, spinning across the wet grass. Cursing, Link scrambled to his feet just as he heard the Hinox's body hit the ground behind him. He risked a glance over his shoulder and saw with satisfaction that it had fallen, twitching, as the malice that gave it life fled.
The gate, Link. They can't hold it. They don't know about their weakness. Damn it, I'm a fool.
Link snatched back up the master's sword and ran the other way, swiping his sword through the shoulder of an armless moblin as he sprinted past. He spotted a Rito.
You. Take flight, go tell the Zora down at the lake that we need their aid.
The Rito hesitated, confusion showing in her eyes.
Go. We've got no chance without them. Tell them to remove the heads.
The Rito finally nodded, and she spread her wings, taking flight by diving off the side of the plateau, flapping hard towards the west. He kept running. He saw Bluto sweep the legs of a bokoblin out from under it and then bring his massive hammer down on its skull, popping it like a ripe tomato. Black mist sprayed out from under the hammer. That'll work, too. Link leaped over the fallen body of a Rito and reached the town center again. Chaos still reigned here. He spotted Riju and ran towards her.
Riju.
She turned, eyes wide with confusion and fear.
Link. What is going on? Try to use your Thunder Helm. See if it has any effect on them. If not, get to the top of the hill. Find safety.
He looked at Bulira, who held her sword at the ready.
Remove their heads to put them down for good.
The tall Gerudo guard nodded in acknowledgement. Tiba was nearby, looking angry as he looked around him. He had his bow in hand, but with his wing broken, it would be useless.
Tiba, try to gather your Rito. I don't know what use arrows will be, but maybe if you have any explosives left, they might help. Otherwise, have them get torches. It's too dark here. People are going to end up hurting each other.
Tiba hesitated but then nodded, turning and hurrying off in the direction of some of the Rito he had brought with him. Lightning crashed nearby, but Link didn't bother to check on Riju. Not seeing either Sidon or Unibo, he turned and sprinted down the hill for the second time. Already, he could see that things had progressed poorly. They had tried to erect a new barricade, but they had been too late, and monsters poured into the town. The defenders fought desperately, but many of the monsters still had their weapons and didn't appear to feel pain or fear. He crashed into the middle of them, calling out instructions and hoping that some of them could hear him amidst the din of the fighting. He used quick stabs and cuts, not bothering to go for killing blows. Yet more came. They flooded in through the open gate, and Link had a fraction of the defenders needed to hold this place. There was still too much confusion. Were they even all awake yet? Cursing, Link disengaged and removed his Sheikah slate, which he had received back after it had been used to bring food in. He pulled up the remote bomb rune and pressed it. When the glowing blue explosive appeared, he picked it up and launched it over the heads of the fighters, towards the gate. He saw it land in the midst of the crowd of monsters pressing to enter the town. A moment later, it went off, sending their bodies flying. It was followed by a series of other explosions beyond the wall as some of Tiba's Rito had apparently found some explosives that remained. Yet, still, they came, barely even slowed. How many were out there, even now? 1,000? Could they hold with the gate gone and the wall in its state? There were gaps in it, they could even slip through them.
Behind you, Link!
Zelda cried. Link spun around, sweeping his shining sword around in a wide arc that cut through the protruding belly of a moblin. It screeched in apparent agony and fell to the ground as the malice flowed out of it. I can't see how can I save them? There's too many. We're too disorganized. They'd already dismantled so much of their defenses. How could they have been so idiotic as to not leave the barricade up? What if those that survived the battle earlier had returned? Goddess, what if they chose to return now? The ground beneath Link rumbled as, suddenly, several Gorons rolled by. He was surprised to see Unibo among them. The Gorons immediately started grabbing pieces of the old barricade and other rubble. They, even Unibo, ran into the midst of the monsters, trying to slow the flow, using the boards and furniture as mobile barricades. Link threw himself back into the battle, destroying monster after monster, trying to clear a path for the Gorons. Monsters already began to set upon them, but their thick hides and even thicker backs made them resilient. The Gorons lashed out with whatever pieces of rubble and refuse they were carrying, sending the undead creatures flying. Suddenly, a sharpened stick rammed into Link's shoulder from behind, and he cried out in pain. He slashed with his sword blindly behind him, catching something. He spun to see the Lizalfo fall to the ground, twitching from a cut in its face. Cursing, Link reached back and yanked the stick from his shoulder and then used it to run a bokoblin through between the eyes. It did not, unfortunately, stop it, though it did throw it off balance considerably. He finished it off with the Master Sword. The Gorons were making a difference. Already, the pieces of wood and stone they found were piled high enough that the monsters had to climb over it to enter the town. Meanwhile, the word about removing heads had apparently spread to the other defenders. The Zora that used spears were at a disadvantage, but many of them had paired off one to pin the monster and the other to hack at it with the sharp edge of their spearheads. Something rumbled on the other side of the wall, and Link tensed, fearing what would come next. A moment later, a weakened section of wall burst in. Standing just on its other side was another Hinox. This one didn't even have an eye remaining, though its empty eye cavity still glowed with a dangerous red light. More monsters began to flow in through this new hole. Screaming in fury, Link ran directly into their midst, sweeping his sword in wide arcs, cutting down dozens before he reached the opening and sliced his sword through the Hinox's thighs. It fell, but the damage was done. No longer restricted to just one large entrance, monsters flooded towards this new opening. And Link stood in their way. He fought desperately, all finesse gone from his movements as he hacked at the creatures racing towards him. Soon, his cause was taken up by others, Gerudo and Zora, who realized that they would be quickly overrun if they didn't hold this spot. Others began to bring what could be salvaged for a new barricade.
"Oh, no,"
he heard Zelda say.
"Link, the villagers."
He pulled back, letting his spot be filled by an eager Gerudo who swung about with her great sword.
"What? I sent them to the hill. There are more monsters from the beach. They're climbing the hill now."
Link's blood ran cold. The Lizalfos from the beach. The ones that Link and Sidon had killed before the battle. He turned and began racing up the hill. As he did so, he saw that a disturbed cook fire had caught one of the houses on fire, the flames already having spread to its roof. He couldn't worry about that now. He continued to sprint through the city until he reached its center, near the inn. Monsters had completely overrun this area, having made it past the meager defenses to the north. Cursing, Link glanced towards the hill and saw shadowy forms racing up it towards its peak. No. I'll never catch them in time. I can't. His eyes widened, and he grabbed the Sheikah slate off his belt. He triggered its teleportation circle just as a moblin charged at him, holding a Gerudo sword that it must have gotten off one of the bodies. He burst into thousands of blue particles and reappeared, moments later, atop Pure Oz Hill, on the circle in front of her hut. Half of the moblin appeared with him. Immediately, people began shrieking and running. The top of the hill was packed with the elderly, the young, and the injured. Anyone who could not still fight had fled here. The half-moblin crawled towards Link on its arms, uttering a guttural sound that sounded unlike any moblin he had ever heard. Its lower torso and legs had been left behind in the village. He turned the sword over in his hand and stabbed it down, into the moblin's back, and then began to shove past the crowd of people.
"Get back! Everybody get back! They're coming!"
More screams, more sobbing. Link saw Pura, who nursed a swollen cheek. Impa was nearby as well, with Paya standing in front of her, still dressed in the traditional Sheikah garb that she had been wearing in the triage tent. She didn't even have her sword. Oh, goddess, the triage. Please send someone to protect them. He couldn't help them now. He could only hope that he wasn't the only one to think of them. He thought of Dorian and Riven, and the dozens of others that were resting under the multicolored canopies.
"Link,"
Impa said in surprise as he pushed past them.
"Stay back."
He found Riju near the edge of the hill, breathing heavily and likely having just ran up the hill. When she saw him, her eyes widened in surprise and confusion.
"Link, what? The Thunder Helm. Did it work?" "No. It didn't do anything to them. They just shook it off like it was nothing."
Link cursed.
"Where's Bulira?" "Still down, fighting. I told her to stay behind since I was retreating to safety."
Damn. I could have used her help. Link nodded, gritting his teeth.
"Stay with the rest of the crowd. I'll protect you."
He hurried past her, reaching the path that led down the hill and starting down it. He met the first Lizalfo at the first turn. They were already so close. Cursing, Link swung his sword through its chest, only for another Lizalfo to leap up from the ground below, landing next to him. Link cursed and dodged a spear thrust before slamming his sword into its open mouth. Others came up behind it. Half a dozen of them rounded the corner and raced towards him on blisteringly fast legs. Link attacked them but was forced to take 2 steps back to catch one that tried to race past him. He heard screams above people who had noticed the Lizalfos, or so he hoped. If any of them had already made it up past him.
"Zelda, tell me what's going on above. Are they safe?"
He received no answer.
"Zelda."
She spoke again, but it was strained. She sounded as though she were in pain.
"Yes. They're just..."
She grunted and disappeared from his mind again.
"Zelda."
When he received nothing further, he cursed and took another step back up the hill as 3 Lizalfos rushed him, each wielded a different weapon. One of them threw a boomerang at him that left a deep gash in his right bicep. He cursed himself for not bringing a shield. He hadn't had time to retrieve it. Monster after monster raced towards him, and Link was forced to give ground again, inching his way back up the hill. What would happen when he got high enough that they could just leap up to the upper level? What if some of them started climbing? A spear pierced his right shoulder, and Link screamed in pain, cutting the spear's haft in two and following up with a diagonal cut down the Lizalfo's chest. He wrenched it out and threw it to the side, off the edge of the hill. Another of the creatures leaped up from the ground beneath the hill. It lacked one of its arms and had a deep cut across its chest, where it had been killed earlier in the day. Link swiped at it, but missed, and it raced up the hill past him.
No.
He slowed time and caught the foul beast just as it crested the hill. He rammed his sword into its back and then turned, watching with horror as the other Lizalfos came up right behind him. A mere 20 feet away stood the crowd of villagers. Many of them began to scream as they saw the beasts. Link threw himself forward again, swinging wildly with his shining sword, cutting down 3 as they attempted to race past him towards the villagers. He spun around, slicing through another 2. As he whirled, his sword shone even more brightly, and he saw a wave of white energy shoot out from his sword's edge in a circle. The monsters that it touched fell dead, as if cut, the black smoke spraying out from their mouths. Some of the light raced back towards the crowd, and he cried out as it washed over them. Nothing happened, however. As it struck them, it merely dissipated harmlessly, as if it were no more than mist. I have to keep them safe. I won't let you have them. Link cut and cut and cut and cut. Eventually, it wasn't just Lizalfos that fell before his blade, but moblins and bokoblins. 2 others from the village had joined the Lizalfos. Did the wall still hold? Did any of his defenders still remain alive? What about Unibo, Sidon, and Tiba? What about Cass, Nat, Robbie, Simon, Jaren, or any of the others that he hadn't yet seen? Did Belira still fight below, or had Riju lost her guard and companion? He stood his ground, at the top of the hill, and he fought an unstoppable tide of monsters. Soon, he faced not just 2 or 3 at a time, but half a dozen that crowded their way up the narrow path, all wielding various weapons or fighting with their bare claws and teeth. Some missed limbs, others bore gaping cuts or holes. They all had wounds, yet they all lived on and fought. They didn't even seem that interested in him. Their prey were the terrified villagers behind Link.
You won't have them!
He screamed as he swept his sword through the chest of a moblin. His sword burst with light, sending an arc of white energy into and through the moblin and into the bokoblin behind it, which fell as surely as if its head had been severed. A Lizalfo raced past him, and Link leaped to the side, stretching, straining and nicking its arm. It was enough. But, in that moment, a moblin rammed a spear in his gut and out his back.
No!
Someone cried. He thought that it might have been Zelda. He had heard her cry like that once before. Goddess, please. Link swept to the side, barely dodging another beam from the Guardian. He was the only one left. He saw no other soldiers on the field, and he had strayed far from the wall, now fighting in the center of the Blatchery plain. Beyond, he could see Guardians racing towards the wall and the few defenders that remained there. Some had already reached it and began to lift their spider-like legs to climb it. Once past the wall, they would continue on to Hateno village. The Master's sword was a leaden weight in his hand. It felt heavier than it had ever felt before, as unwieldy and unbalanced as a hunk of iron. The rust on the blade had spread further, brown tendrils reaching out to cover parts of it, like rot. Other pieces of the blade had broken free. He used it more as a club now than a sword. The Guardian raced across the ground towards him, and Link ran towards it. Zelda was behind him, hiding behind the remains of one of the machines that he had killed earlier. How many had he destroyed? A dozen? 2? It felt as though he had been fighting for hours, though he was sure it was only minutes. It was hopeless. He couldn't keep fighting. His body screamed with every move. His left arm didn't even work anymore, forcing him to clumsily use his right. The Guardian shot fire at him, and Link spun to the side. The beam grazed his chest, searing through cloth and flesh. It burned through the strap on his sword's scabbard, and it fell off his back. He cried out in agony, yet he fought still. He reached it and hacked ineffectually at its leg. It swung its leg, catching him in the side and throwing him into the air.
Link!
He heard Zelda cry. He hit the ground and rolled. Somehow, he maintained his hold on the Master's sword. the guardian advanced on him, and he pushed himself up, groaning as his body rebelled. He wished he could die. But he couldn't. Not with Zelda so close. If he died, then they would fire on her next. He roared in defiance and ran forward. As he approached the guardian, its eye flashed with its deadly energy again. He kicked his legs out, sliding onto his back, passing under its huge base. It fired where he had just been, striking another of its kind just behind him. Link rammed his master's sword up into the circle of glowing blue energy at its bottom. It had the same effect as piercing the eye. At once, the guardian grew rigged. He rolled to the side, barely clearing himself from under it when its legs collapsed, sending its body to the ground. He kept rolling. The machine exploded, and his position low to the ground kept him from the brunt of it. Finally, he stopped and pushed himself to his feet, groaning. Another guardian destroyed. Yet still, so many remained. He turned, seeing Zelda peering out from behind the dead guardian, looking at him with fear. Grass everywhere around them burned, despite the rain. I have to get her to safety. She needs to hide. A cave, the river, somewhere. A guardian shot him in the center of his back. Link screamed as the beam carried him off his feet and towards Zelda. He hit the ground in a heap, rolling through a patch of burning grass, to end up lying on his back, staring up at the cloudy sky. His vision had gone dark at the edges. No. No, I have to. Zelda. I have to get her to safety. He rolled onto his stomach, shaking fingers clawing at dirt and grass, searching. A moment later, he felt the hilt of the master's sword, and he grasped it. Groaning, he began trying to push himself up. Zelda was there. She wrapped her hands under his arms, helping him rise. But he couldn't. Not fully. He placed the sword's tip down, using it to push himself up to a kneeling position. He tried to stand, but he didn't have the strength left in his legs. Everything was going numb. He didn't feel his back anymore, nor his left arm. Zelda gripped his shoulder tightly from behind.
Link, please. Save yourself. Go.
Go? I can't. Go. I have to. Keep you safe. Everything was fuzzy. The edges of his vision darkened further, and he blinked his eyes, trying to focus on what Zelda was saying.
I'll be fine. Don't worry about me. You must run.
Run? I tried getting you to run earlier. I can't. I can't run. Not while. No. Groaning, Link pushed himself to his feet, wobbling and barely standing upright. His head spun, but he gritted his teeth, focusing on his pain rather than the growing numbness.
Please, Link, don't do this.
He lifted his head, chest heaving, heart racing as if it knew its time was short. A guardian climbed over a rock outcrop, and its head swiveled around, seeing them. Its red lights pulsed, and it approached closer. In that moment, Link knew everything that he had done wrong in his life. The times that he didn't cherish with his mother, father, and sister. He should have made more time for Mipha before the end. And Daruk. He should have just been honest with Zelda from the beginning. Goddess, how things could have been different between them. So much time wasted. He should have told Zelda that he loved her as soon as he had known it. And he had had so many chances. His greatest regret. Why had he waited so long? He should have run away with her. Just taken her far away from her father, from this dim kingdom and its expectations. He had let it all burn, if it meant keeping her safe. He could have taken her away from these guardians. From Ganon. They could have been happy. He thought that they could have been happy. They could have gotten married. Had children. Zelda could have taught them all about Sheikah technology and all of those little things in nature that she loved to study. And Link. He would have taught them how to cook, and the best ways to scale a tree. No more swords. No more fighting. No more death. But it was all too late for that. He stared death in the face and accepted it. He had failed. His family. His kingdom. His Zelda. So often, he had lived in failure, and now he would die in failure as well. And his failure would kill her, too. The guardian raced forward, climbing onto the bodies of its fallen brethren, and rose up on its 6 legs, staring down at them. It paused, as if relishing this moment. And then its eye pulsed with energy. Link opened his mouth to scream one last curse to the heavens, but no sound came out. He didn't even have the strength left for that.
No!
Zelda cried, and suddenly she was in front of him, hand raised towards the guardian. She burst into golden light. All rips, tears, and grime on her dress disappeared in an instant, and she was pristine. Her hair flowed behind her, as if it had been caught by a strong breeze. And her hand. Her hand shone with powerful, blinding light. From that hand, the golden white light spread out in a dome that blossomed out in all directions, consuming everything around them. For several seconds, the only thing that Link could see was Zelda, standing with her arm outstretched, eyes wide with fear and determination, and that beautiful power, surrounding them. Then the light faded, save for a single pillar of brilliance that stretched down from the heavens, bathing her in its golden hue. That, too, faded seconds later, though she kept her hand raised towards the guardian. The guardian shook. Its lights flickered and then went out. Its legs collapsed, and it teetered for a moment before careening back to sink into the wet earth. He saw something burst from it, a red, black mist that rose to the sky before fading. Others around them fell in the same way. Every guardian, every single one at the Blatchery Plain, collapsed, their life winking out. It all happened in a wonderful, radiant moment. She did it. She really did it. Link stared at her back, vision growing dark, save for her. He could still see her. His princess. His goddess. She lowered her hand, and he heard her say something, but he couldn't make it out. The world upended around him, and he collapsed to the ground, still holding the Master Sword in his right hand. Zelda was there a moment later, kneeling in the dirt beside him, rolling him onto her lap. His eyelids flickered, and he could see her lips, her eyes, her hair. "I can go now, Zell. You've done it. You'll save us all." She spoke, but he couldn't hear any more. He wished that he could hear her voice just one last time. To hear her speak his name. To hear her laugh. To hear her cry. There had been good times, too, between his failures. And then Link, hero, bearer of the Master Sword, champion of Hyrule, and friend of Zelda, was no more.
Link!
He roared. He would not die today. He would not die again. He would hear Zelda's voice. He would be reunited with her. He would tell her everything that he had within him, all the things that he hadn't said. And he would protect this land. He cut the moblin in two and then wrenched the spear out of his gut. His wounds healed instantaneously with a rush of frigid cold. He swept his sword again and again, arcs of white light spraying out and washing over the monsters. They fell, each and every one. They tried to get past him, but he didn't let them. He stood between them and their prey, slashing through their bodies as if they were made of paper. He moved like the wind. No, he was the wind. Everything around him had slowed to a crawl in this moment, his abilities knew no limit. Rage fueled him. Rage at what was lost. Rage at his failures. Rage at Ganon for destroying so much of what he loved. Ganon thought he had won, but Link would take it back. He would take everything from that monster. A massive figure raced up onto the hill. The Lionel's head hung limply to the side, held on by only a little bit of muscle and sinew. A hole gaped in its chest, where Link had run it through. One of its front legs hung limply. It looked down at him, its single eye glowing with red fury. It opened its mouth, and emitted a sound unlike anything Link had ever heard. It was a roar and a screech. And, in it, he heard a single word. Hero. The Lionel raced for him, and Link met it before it could near the villagers. It swept one of its fists towards him, but he ducked under it, ramming his Master Sword up and into its torso. It shook, but did not immediately die. It tried grabbing him, but Link spun away again, leaving a gash on its army. Why isn't it dying? He wondered, as he watched black mist spray forth from the two wounds. The creature still stood, baring its teeth on its lopsided head. It charged towards him. Link ducked to the side and focused his mind on nothing else but this single monster. Everything stopped. Not even the wind blew. The Lynel remained still, arms outstretched, reaching for him. Its mouth was open in a silent roar. He attacked. He slashed, stabbed, cut, and bled this creature. He left gaping holes and open wounds all along its flank. He attacked and attacked until he had nothing left. Until time reasserted itself with a lurch. Mist burst forth from the Lynel in a cloud not unlike that which came from Ganon's blights. It rose above the Lynel's body, swirling around itself, and began to take shape. It grew, black and red and grotesque, forming a pig-like face with tusks and glowing yellow eyes. And then it dissipated. The Lynel collapsed to the ground, limp and dead. Other monsters that had arrived behind it, likewise, began to collapse, the light in their eyes going out. Overhead, the moon shifted from red to a pale white. It's over. They're safe. I protected them. With a soft groan, Link teetered and then fell, the blackness of exhaustion overtaking him. End of chapter.